Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And right now, I would like to speak with you one more time with regard to this extraordinary work, which is directed by David Lynch, and it's called Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, and it's from the year 1992. Of course, it is encompassing a lot of the stories and characters and themes and moods and atmospheres that are part of this wonderful drama, this wonderful landmark series, which is Twin Peaks. So I have, over the course of a number of videos, been sharing or have endeavored to try to share and convey to all of you my feelings about this work. And so it's one of my hopes that I was able to convey the extent of how much I feel about this film. I've seen it so many times, and I return to it rather frequently, even now. And every time I revisit this world of Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, I'm left feeling very stunned and confused and perplexed in a very good way, and left asking more questions and re-evaluating and rethinking what it was that I thought this film was about to me. Because that's the thing about this film and works of David Lynch. It has a way of really, and I say in a very positive way, questioning the way I have interpreted and held my views about this film for so long. And that's a really exciting thing. That's one of the exciting things about watching a film like Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me. Indeed, it's one of the exciting things about rewatching series like Twin Peaks, because it allows for that type of room for reassessment and reevaluation and reinterpretation in a very fun and exciting way. And also, I dare say, too, that's the fun thing about watching the works of David Lynch, because each in its own way has that type of power, the way of being able to withstand so much repeat viewing and so much scrutiny of a repeat nature, and still manage not just to hold its value, but also to provide a sense of breadth of scope of reinterpretation. And that's a really tall order indeed, and that's really powerful. That shows a sense of longevity. It shows a sense, of course, of the reach of the fans and its popularity, but also it just shows the scope of a lot of the things that are happening within the very themes and the screen and the shots and the lighting and textures, both sound-wise and also visually, and everything that encompasses the points that connect the two to make up this awesome viewing experience, which is Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me. So it has been my hope that over the course of these videos, I've been able, in some way anyway, in my limited fashion, to be able to convey a little bit about how much I feel about this extraordinary work of art, as it sits in the context of the world of Twin Peaks, as well as it sits in the context of the world of David Lynch's films, as well as it sits as a film in and of itself, as a viewing experience, as part of what I'd like to call my own cinema journey. So it's been my great pleasure and honor to be able to speak a little bit about, maybe over the course of 10 plus videos or so, being able to speak a little bit about Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me. The purpose of today's discussion is to maybe provide a type of conclusion and also give a sense of what is to come. Now, I will, of course, I won't go into too much detail about the plot, but I'm assuming that if you've come this far, then you have seen Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, and you've seen Twin Peaks, the pilot, seasons 1 and 2. So my assumption is that it's okay to speak about details that might have merged in any of those points, including Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me. So if you haven't seen Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, or seasons 1 and 2, or the pilot of the series, my strong suggestion is please turn off this video right now, and you can always come back at any time. I would love to hear your thoughts about this incredible work, but I don't want to spoil anything about your own Twin Peaks journey if you're visiting the world of Twin Peaks for the first time. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, as I've mentioned before, I am in no way a Twin Peaks expert, so I'm getting a lot of the details wrong. I've already gotten a lot of the details wrong. I've tried to correct myself where possible, but where I'm unable to or I miss something, please, I beg your pardon. I ask for your forgiveness, and I will try my best to better myself in terms of preparation and grasping of the details where necessary. But I am doing my very best all the same. So, with those preliminaries out of the way, let me now just use this opportunity to conclude, or just add a few more thoughts and then conclude. And so, as I was trying to mention at the end, the tail end of the last discussion, where we were talking about the final moments of the film, before we go into those wonderful credits, and before I forget, I should point out I mentioned a little bit in the passing, the final stages of that last discussion, but I love how Mrs. Tremont's name is mentioned, and the parentheses are used Chalfont. So that is also an indication that perhaps they are the one and the same person or being or entity or existence, because the film didn't itself make its connections in that way. And we could make some kind of inference, or we could make some kind of guess, but it didn't directly say, oh, they are one, but we're actually getting that information in the credits. So it's also mentioned to say that we should always watch the credits of any Twin Peaks film or show or episode or part. We might get some clue as to how we might then interpret certain aspects of Twin Peaks, what we've just seen, and perhaps too what we will see in the future. And I also love, as I mentioned, the way in which the film's closing credits incorporates the face, the image of Laura Palmer. It's a different image. It's the one that we had seen that closes out her time in the film and her final moments of the film in this room. And so it's a different image of her face. We were always used to her face as it appeared either in the photograph, the iconic photograph of Laura Palmer, or as it might appear in, let's say, like a reflection in a coffee cup, for instance, if you recall how the closing credits of season 2's final episode ended. Although queer whether that is indeed Laura Palmer or not, but in any event, it was a figure that looked like Laura Palmer, at least a figure that, shall we say, is portrayed by Cheryl Lee, let's put it that way. But in any event, we have the way in which this film closes out. And as I was trying to refer to in my last video discussion, this was, for the longest time, the way that Twin Peaks ended. Because after this time, we have to remember that there weren't any new Twin Peaks stories. We didn't know whether there would be another Twin Peaks story or whether this would be, in fact, the end. And so for the longest time, indeed, this was the end of Twin Peaks. This was the last image that we would see in terms of the continuity of broadcast and release scheduling. And so for that to happen, we have so many unresolved threads that were left over, in essence, from not just the film, but I'm speaking also primarily from the end of season 2. We have to recall, too, that the film Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me does leave a number of open-ended questions within itself. For instance, what happened to Chet Desmond? Or what is the relationship between Bob and Mike and the man from another place? Or who is Mrs. Tremont, and what's the deal between Tremont and Chalfont? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what is the blue rose? So what does this mean in terms of the meaning and significance of that? That was picked up at the early Deer Meadow sequences, but essentially, at least not directly anyway, picked up again when we get into the Laura Palmer Twin Peaks sequences. Or was it? Who knows? But we may have to, let me just hold off there for now. But in any event, these questions, again, emerging from the film Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me itself, could be said in one way to have remained unresolved by the film's conclusions. That's one thing. Another thing, too, which I was referring to in my last discussion, is that there are a number of plot threads from the series that were not addressed directly in this theatrical version of Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. And I mentioned this before. For instance, if you recall the last episodes of season 2, what happened after, say, that stuff happened between Ben Horne and Doc Hayward. Although even after that moment in that episode, there was the final moment with Cooper in the hotel room, and the brushing the teeth, and Doc Hayward is there. So we assume that Doc Hayward is there, even though the thing happened between him and Ben Horne. So why is he? If something serious happened to Ben Horne, then why isn't Doc Hayward under arrest or something? But anyway, so maybe that indicates something. It wasn't a serious thing that happened to Ben Horne. But my point is that we are not sure exactly what the situation is between Ben Horne and Donna and Doc Hayward is by the time we get Donna's story, of course, but it happened prior to those events of season 2. So that's the first thing. Another question is what happened to Audrey. Of course, we know from the end of season 2 what happened to Audrey in a very explosive way that she seems to have encountered certain circumstances, as well as Pete and others. So what happened to those people? Are they okay? Are they alive? Are they not alive? Etc. So that's another question or set of questions that remains unresolved even after the end of Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. Another situation I mentioned before: Nadine and Ed and Norma and Mike. So what is going to happen to this this situation? Because after all, Nadine has now quote unquote returned to normal, end quote. And that means that she now understands and believes that she is with Ed. That now has the potential of spoiling the plans that were in the works between Norma and Ed towards the tail end of season 2. So what's going to happen with that plot thread? We don't get a sense of that after watching Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, this version anyway. So there's another question there. Also, I should mention too, what happened to Dale Cooper? As we know, at the end of season 2, there's a really shocking cliffhanger. I guess we may infer that the cliffhanger was in one sense resolved by watching Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. After all, the question that leaves us by the season 2's end is, how's Annie? And so we get a sense kind of how Annie is, I suppose, when we watch Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. The one moment where Annie is featured, around the time that Laura Palmer in the film has her quote-unquote dream. And the ring that appears and then disappears, of course. But then, so that's one way perhaps that Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me in a sense resolves the cliffhanger. Another way that one can say that the film kind of resolves that cliffhanger is that, in fact, we see the version of Dale Cooper, which we can interpret to be the version of Dale Cooper that exists after season 2's cliffhanger climax ending. And so Dale Cooper is seen to be visiting or walking through the rooms. He meets the man from another place. He says, "Don't take the ring, Laura." And then also the way that the film ends, this could be a version of Dale Cooper that is after he has actually entered into the lodge and cannot get out, the good Dale anyway. So, at least according to Annie. So it could be interpreted that these images of Dale Cooper that are associated with the lodge could be post-season 2 Dale Cooper. In which case, in that way, Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me serves as a sequel as well as a prequel. And in that way, it serves as a kind of resolution, somewhat, sort of, maybe, to the events that concluded season 2, the climactic episode of season 2. But at the same time, I understand it could be seen as a somewhat, maybe frustrating way to end things, because it's so frustratingly unresolved in a sense. So we don't know what's going to happen with Dale Cooper. Is he really going to be able to escape the lodge or not? If so, how is he going to escape? What's going on there? Is he going to be trapped there forever? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're not sure if this is going to get resolved in a way that we hope and wish and want it does, especially given our love and affection for a character like Dale Cooper. So in that way, therefore, Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, and the way it ends, feels also quite unresolved in that way. So that's another example of the feeling of things left open by Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. However, I should point out that if Twin Peaks has shown us anything in the course of our encounters with Twin Peaks, in terms of season 1, how season 1 ends, season 2, how season 2 ends, and this film, Fire Walk With Me, how it ends, it seems like Twin Peaks, in terms of its groups or in terms of its presentations in seasons or blocks, it always seems to end in this tantalizing, frustrating cliffhanger fashion where things are left unresolved. And so maybe in terms of habit, one can become accustomed to the way that Twin Peaks ends in this fashion, or it seems to be ending in this fashion, at least thus far. So we shall wait and see if there are any future Twin Peaks stories to see if this ending approach holds water, or perhaps there might be a different way, a more quote-unquote finality to certain ways that the stories resolve themselves. But in any event, we have these open-ended questions that always we have as we leave these parts that are Twin Peaks, these segments anyway, including this segment known as Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. At least that's one way of looking at it. However, that being said, and this is something that I tried to convey in my last discussion as well, even if I might regard Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me to end rather open-endedly, I still regard it as being a really beautiful, and in that way a type of a beautifully it's a beautiful conclusion that has a sense of finality to it on the one hand, because of the fact that it seems to close in a almost triumphant and uplifting way, optimistic way, despite all of the negative and horrible things that have happened to Laura Palmer. It does seem, in my eyes, one way to look at it, to see it as a type of uplifting, triumphant, and optimistic close. Not, of course, bereft of any sense of sadness or regret or lack of hope. On the contrary, those are still always lingering in the world of Twin Peaks, especially as this film ends, and especially with what this film has presented to us. But be that as it may, I still regard it as a hopeful and very optimistic ending, and a very beautiful one at that. And in that view, I look at Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me the way it ends, with a sense of hopeful finality. And it was that type of lingering feeling that always occupied my thoughts whenever I would revisit this film during the period where there was nothing else beyond Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. And so even though there are these unanswered questions, at the same time I felt emotionally that it had closed. And in that way, it does feel like its own complete thing. Even though I also acknowledge that it's very much reliant on a knowledge of what had happened in the pilot in seasons 1 and 2. But therein lies, I think, one of the great complex natures, or the ways in which this film has a really lovely, dynamic, complex nature. It's its own thing on the one hand, in that it relies on the events and circumstances and characters of a separate TV series on the other hand. When I say separate, it means they've been broadcast separately, so their own kind of production units, separate entities, although, of course, there are connections because of the storyline, etc., and the continuity, I understand. But in terms of the production details, these are produced similarly but separately, if you know what I mean. So it's its own separate thing. So there's an internet connectivity that is essential, but it's also its own thing, which is also essential. And that also goes to this idea of the balance and dynamic and contradictions that are inherent within Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me for me, that are always so fascinating and so tantalizing. That is, the similarities and differences. It's its own thing, and yet it's interdependent on something else. It's the past, and it's also the future. It's absence, and it's also presence. It's life, and it's death. And it's everything at once. And I think, for me, therefore, Twin Peaks, the series, has always, in my mind, encompassed these extremes of, say, life and death, absence and presence, similarity and difference. Future and past, but it never. I think for me, those themes, while they exist in the series, I think don't find any fuller crystallization in my eyes than they do in Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. In other words, when I watch Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, it seems like everything seems to come to place. It all comes together, and all these things about the extremities of the different, say, feelings and tenors and substances that are colliding all at once that make up the story of Twin Peaks. While they have always been there in the series, they seem to come to the fore in a full-bodied form in Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, such that it lays bare all the absurdities and all the comic beats in a way that also at the same time encompasses that sense of contradictory nature Things can be funny and scary at the same time. Things can be totally absurd and emotionally resonant at the same time. Things can be odd and quirky, but also very close and very understandable at the same time. People can be known and yet unknown at the same time. They can be close friends and yet distant strangers at the very same time. And it's all in the little details, but then you take a step back and it all seems to make sense in this type of framework. It is and it isn't. Yes and no. Life and death. It's all interwoven here, and it's given such great cinematic force and expression in a work like Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. So I love this. I absolutely love this to bits. And as I say, it has that way of bringing things together of the lore of Twin Peaks, while of course exploding it in ways that can lead to further more questions that are exponentially increased. In other words, for every answer that's given, there are like 10 new questions that are given in terms of the world of Twin Peaks. So I feel like that with Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. That's part of the fun of watching Twin Peaks. And that's also part of the fun of watching Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Now, at the same time, it is its own David Lynch work and film. And I've tried to indicate where, I understand that Twin Peaks is, of course, a creation of Mark Frost and David Lynch, very much so. And it's this interesting combination of their characteristics and their concerns as artists and their foci in terms of dramatic beats and information presentation to viewers, etc. And they have a very interesting way in which this collides over the course of the series Twin Peaks. But Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, I understand, is David Lynch, Robert Engels and David Lynch. Of course, Mark Frost's name is mentioned, but we understand that in terms of the production history, this is a David Lynch work, and is a David Lynch directed film. And so, in many ways, it could be said also that as a work of David Lynch, as a film in the filmography, director of filmography of David Lynch, this has a very peculiar position, does it not? Again, as I mentioned before, because it seems to be so dependent on something that exists outside of that filmography, namely the series of Twin Peaks. Now, at the same time, I still hold this to be my favorite David Lynch film ever. I'm a big fan of the works of David Lynch, and there are many films that I could say are among my favorites: Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet, Eraserhead. But if I had to pick one film that was my absolute favorite, if I had to make a list of my favorite David Lynch directed films of all time, number one would be Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. And it's because I love the sense of optimism and triumph, even in the face of disaster and sadness and utter despair and hopelessness. Because the utter despair and hopelessness is expressed in the story of Laura Palmer, and it's very, very upsetting. It's a very terrifying and horrifying tale, and it's a very unsettling experience. And amongst that, or notwithstanding that, or insofar as that the film expresses those points, it also expresses a sense of breathtaking beauty. And in the face of, for lack of a better expression, in the face of evil, there is a sense of self-confidence and also salvation and laughter and beauty, which is, of course, embodied by the performance of Cheryl Lee as Laura Palmer here. It's an extraordinary performance. In that way, that is one primary reason why I hold this film so dear to my heart. I always saw it as a really a very powerful film that also ventures into territories of religious imagery and in terms of the angel, heaven, and hell, which is also, I think, very much in keeping with the lore of Twin Peaks, as well as the sensibilities of David Lynch as a filmmaker. And I love that. I love that sense of uplift, and I love that sense of even in the face of total despair, There is a very almost a human message that is at the heart of this. Not to say that those human messages are absent in any of David Lynch's other films. I mean, they exist very strongly, I think, in works like Mulholland Drive, Straight Story, Inland Empire. So, but there's something very magical about how it operates here in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me as a film, as a David Lynch directed film, such that I find it to be very charming and I think heartwarming and powerful. At the same time, it gives me jolts. It gives me, they feel like pinpricks of cinematic energy that then pave the way to jolts of lightning, or dare I say it, electricity. And those bolts of electricity linger in the mind forever. Like I don't know. I can't. I can never in my life undo or unsee the images, say, of Philip Jeffries, and I can never unsee the images of Garmin Bozia, and this is Formica Table, and I can never unsee the images of Laura Palmer walking down the street. We see her for the first time alive, walking down the street with the the Badalamenti music in the air, and she calls out Donna. And then, lo and behold, who do we see but Moira Kelly as Donna Hayward there? But I've talked a little bit about how I feel about that in the course of this conversation series. But these are things that I can never unsee. And in fact, for me, a lot of the beauty and mystery and appeal of Twin Peaks as a whole, a lot of it I rely on. I rely on this film. For instance, when I think of Twin Peaks, I oftentimes think immediately of images and sounds and feelings and ideas that I associate with Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. So, for instance, the Philip Jeffries situation. For instance, the image of the blue rose on Lil. Or, for instance, the way that Chet Desmond crouches down and reaches out for the ring and then all of a sudden disappears. Or the way that Dale Cooper is standing there over Laura Palmer as the film closes out. These images are what come to mind almost immediately when someone says to me Twin Peaks, because they are very much Twin Peaks to me. There are many other images and many sounds and songs, of course, that travel to my heart and my mind whenever someone mentions Twin Peaks to me. Jimmy Scott comes to mind, Audrey's Dance comes to mind. Some quotes involving Pete Martell come to mind. The way that Ben and Jerry Horn eat sandwiches comes to mind, and many others. But also certain beats and sounds and moments of Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me also come to mind. So that's my way of trying to come full circle. It feels like a David Lynch film, but it's also part of the Twin Peaks fabric, but is also doing it in a way that is very much David Lynch, perhaps more David Lynch than Mark Frost, although it does acknowledge a lot of the David Lynch, Mark Frost beats of Twin Peaks while still being a David Lynch film, and then going back to Twin Peaks, how it reminds me of the whole thing writ large. And so I'm going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth in my feelings, but this is also my way, I hope, to try to illustrate just how much I think this film is a very wonderfully dynamic, contradictory beast. And bravo to Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me for being that and then some. And in that way, I find this film to be utterly captivating and one of the great movie experiences of my life. I remember when I saw this film for the first time, I was totally lost. I had no idea what was going on. What is this film? I didn't like it. I was reacting kind of negatively to it, if I remember correctly, but it has grown on me so much, and it has just soared in my heart and my soul. It's one of the most important stops along the way of my own personal cinema journey. I dare say if I didn't see this film Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, I wouldn't be the person that I am now. I mean, it's that important to me, and it has a lot of seemingly imperfections as well, but those imperfections give way to a sense of a type of grand scheme and meaning and significance, and so it's so genius the way it's put together. Every time I see it, something new pops up. Even over the course of these discussions, when I watched it, things pop up that didn't occur to me before. And it's that type of film. It comes alive with a sense of spirit and energy, but also it keeps the mysteries intact. It reveals the answers while still maintaining the mystery, and that is kind of the lifeblood of great stories in the world of Twin Peaks, including Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. So I'm kind of rambling at this point, and so I really will try to bottle my answer or bottle my conversation here by drawing it to a close. And so let me endeavor to close this conversation by saying one last time that I really adore this film, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. I always have, even during the period where it seemed like this was the only thing. This was the last thing, last story from the world of Twin Peaks, visually speaking anyway, that, even during those periods, during those years when we didn't know whether we would get a new story of Twin Peaks or not, even during that time, or perhaps because of that time, this film just grew and grew and grew in my estimation, to the point where now it has soared and catapulted, and it's skyrocketed in my heart and soul to become not only my favorite David Lynch directed film, but also in many ways one of my favorite stories in the whole lore and scope and breadth that is the world of Twin Peaks. A lot of my favorite moments are encompassed right here in this very film. And so with that, my dear friends, it has been my great honor and pleasure and privilege to have been able to share with you just a little bit about a little bit of what I feel about this work. As I mentioned before, one of my goals of doing this YouTube channel has been, in fact, to speak about Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me in detail. I was never able to do that until now. And the reason why I was never able to do that before is because I knew that in order for me to be able to speak about Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, I would have needed to have first spoken about Twin Peaks the series. And in order for me to be able to comfortably, in my own way, speak about Twin Peaks the series, I knew I had to speak about each episode. I know it's maybe for some people, I maybe go on a bit too long. I might be in need of an editor, etc. I just kind of go on and on and on. I apologize if you feel that way, but that's just the way I am. It's like the scorpion and the frog. I can't help it. It's in my nature. But so it's in my nature to just go on and on and on like this. But it's just my way also of trying to express just how much I love this stuff. And I love the series, but it was always something that was a big project to talk about each of the episodes, because it does take some time and energy to be able to do that. I didn't know I would be able to do that, but with the great support of my dear friends, my dear friends, you out there, and I mentioned the people who have been watching and supporting the channel, and also these videos and these video discussions. I want to give a shout out in particular to many people, but in particular I want to shout out once again to Seth, my dear friend Seth Walsh, for being such a great support and inspiration, pushing me along when I needed it, especially when I needed that extra push to keep going. I was able to talk about the series in a way that I was comfortable with. And once I was able to, and it was so fun to be able to do that, because I love the series very much. And then once I was able to do that, I could now come to Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. And now being able to talk about, and I was able to talk about Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. And I knew, however, that I just wanted to say so much that I don't know if I just talk about it in a maybe 10-minute video or 20-minute video. I wasn't quite sure, so I decided to break it up a little bit. And 2 or 3 parts became 4 or 5, 6 parts, and it became 11 parts total. It's just because, again, the depth of my admiration for this work knows no bounds. I really admire this work, and I just wanted to express, therefore, how much and why I admired this work so much. And the only way I could be able to do that is if I had spoken already about Twin Peaks the series, which I had, and now with that basis, I could now go and talk about this film that I'd always wanted to talk about ever since I'd started this YouTube channel, which is Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. And so now I've reached the end of that, and in many ways, one of my bucket list items when it comes to this YouTube channel is now coming to a close. So I just want to say, to my dear friends, thank you very much for pushing me and keeping me inspired and just motivating me to keep on going to the very end. I don't know if I was able to speak to everything I wanted to say about Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, but I think I came pretty close in terms of what I wanted to say. If I am reminded of something that I forgot to say, I'll probably mention it later. But in any event, this is my way to close out a discussion that I'd always wanted to do for many years, and now it's done. It's over. So thank you very much for giving me that opportunity. But I should say in closing that, as we know, this is I'm making this video in the year 2023, and there's no hiding the fact anymore that this is indeed not the last Twin Peaks story that we ended up seeing after 1992. So some years passed, but through it all, there were other Twin Peaks stories, other series, other releases, such as The Missing Pieces, such as The Return. So, while I say that this is the end of the discussion run on Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, let me then say also that the next time we see each other in a Twin Peaks video discussion, it will be my great pleasure and honor to start a discussion with you, my dear friends, if you're interested, about Twin Peaks, The Missing Pieces, each of these missing pieces. Because a discussion of the missing pieces actually is very significant and very relevant when it comes to a further, say, reading and understanding and engagement with Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. So there will be a discussion series on each of the missing pieces, Twin Peaks The Missing Pieces. So if you're interested, my dear friends, you can start by watching The Missing Pieces, and we can see each other at the next Twin Peaks themed video, at which time I'll try to introduce that discussion series and start that in earnest. And then, my dear friends, after the discussion series on Twin Peaks The Missing Pieces has concluded, then it is my intention to begin a discussion series in earnest about each of the parts that are that make up this series, which is commonly referred to as Twin Peaks The Return. So this is my way, therefore, to say thank you for allowing me to end this discussion run, but in fact, it is not the end. We are perhaps just getting started. So if you're interested, my dear friends, to continue on with the Twin Peaks discussion journey with me, I hope to see you at the next run. I don't know when it will be uploaded, but I'll try as soon as possible to start the ball rolling with The Missing Pieces, and then to continue such rolling of the ball with the discussion of The Return. So if you are interested, my dear friends, if you want to know what you can do to prepare, my suggestion is after you have seen the pilot, after you've seen seasons 1 and seasons 2, and after you've seen Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, and if you've rewatched them, that's great. You can rewatch to your heart's content. Then what's next is Twin Peaks The Missing Pieces, each of these missing pieces. And then after that, we'll go into The Return. So if you haven't seen any of these works yet, The Missing Pieces or The Return, now's your chance. And it would be my great honor if you and I could together explore and examine, or re-examine as the case may be, these stories from the world of Twin Peaks. Oh, my dear friends, my dear, dear friends, won't you join me? Thank you very much for allowing me this great opportunity to talk about one of my favorite films. Thank you very much indeed, my dear friend. See you at the next one. Cheers.